Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. Just a quick reminder before this story starts that this is a part 2. And down below and in the little eye icon, there'll be a link to part 1. Please enjoy. Into the Labyrinth, part 2, by Sean E. Britten.
And now it's hunting us.
So it would seem.
The others joined them on the side of the fire.
What are we going to do?
Pyro said.
Are we still going after the treasure?
Treasure? We don't even know if there is a treasure.
Theo said.
But we know they're out there. Whatever it took Hesiod and Timotheus.
We wait here, recover our breath, and see if this thing or things attack us. If not, we retreat to the entrance. We don't know what we're up against. We could only go for the treasure with more men, more swords.
The 6 of them extinguished their torches and rewrapped the heads. They grew the fire in the center of the room into a blaze, but there was only so much of the Minotaur's furniture to burn. They should have plenty of fuel for the torches to get them back to the entrance. But that assumed they didn't run into any more blockades. Sophus ran over his scrolls, looked for potential alternate routes in the spiderweb of lines.
They're watching. They're watching.
Soon, flames across the ashes of the broken furniture guttered low. Only one of the 7 torches was lit. Sophus held it over his scroll. Alexos and the rest of the men began to get anxious to move again. Suddenly, Pyro started.
Over there. Over there. I saw one of them.
Pyros ran towards one of the identical doorways. Alexos, Dracon, and Theo followed him. Alexos only saw a glimpse of white returning into the shadows.
Wait! Don't! Follow it!
Alexos commanded.
What was it? What did it look like?
Dracon asked.
A man. It looked like a man, but all white, with black eyes.
Suddenly, a strange cry came from behind them. A shout of alarm came from Sophus as well. Alexos and the others spun. 3 creatures had emerged from one of the doorways and snatched Typhon. The one Pyros had seen was merely a distraction. While most of the men crossed the room, the creatures had emerged and grabbed the first man they saw. Typhon fought back, but 2 of the creatures wrapped themselves around his brawly arms. The other wrapped around his waist, ramming some kind of ivory knife repeatedly into Typhon's side to avoid his armor. Blood gushed over his hip. He thrashed and fought, but to no avail. The trio of pale creatures dragged him towards the doorway. Alexos, Dracon, and the other pair stampeded towards them, but they disappeared into the darkness. If the men followed, they'd quickly be lost and on equal footing with the creatures.
Torches! Grab them!
With a short sword in one hand, Alexos scooped up one of the torches and jammed it into the remains of the fire. It quickly ignited, and the others did the same as they swarmed towards the doorway.
What were those things?
As Pyros had said, the creatures looked human. Of the 3 that grabbed Typhon, 2 had been men, while one looked like a young woman. But they had been naked, and their skin had been as pale as fish bellies. Their bodies looked wasted and warped, all bone and sinewy muscle, not a speck of meat on them. Their hair was stringy and looked as if it had fallen out in patches. And the expression on their face had been animal. No humanity whatsoever.
Move together. Don't get separated.
Typhon's blood splattered the floor, giving them a trail to follow. Alexos took the lead. They heard nothing except their own heavy breathing and pounding hearts. Typhon's cries had already been silenced. The labyrinth seemed eerily quiet.
I've lost it all. I've lost the trail.
Alexos said, sweeping his torch around. One of the creatures screeched out of the passages to Alexos's left. Teeth were bared in a feral scream. It was one of those males and carried some sort of weapon. Alexos brought his short sword around. The creatures seemed to be alone, attacking 4 of them even though they were all armored and armed and it was totally naked. But then the 4 of them couldn't fight together in narrow passage. Alexos struggled to even bring his sword to bear quickly in the confined space. The creature lunged and Alexos threw himself backwards. Its weapon wasn't so much a knife or a sword, but a jagged spike. A leg bone, Alexos realized as it cleaved past his face, which had been snapped and sharpened in a primitive weapon by being run along the rough stone. Alexos batted it away with the side of his sword. Alexos flung his other hand around, clutching the torch and shoving into the creature's face. Its eyes were large and deep, savage lines etched into its face. In spite of all of that, it didn't look that old. The underground creature recoiled as if burned and threw one arm over its eyes, screeching. The creature retreated back down the corridor into the shadow and disappeared around another corner. Alexos started after them, but was distracted by a cry behind him.
They got me! They got me!
Theo yelled. 3 creatures had swarmed from the side passage and knocked Theo to the ground. They dragged him towards another doorway into darkness. Pyro struggled to bring his hammer around in the small space. Dracon, behind Pyros, shot forward with his spear and harpooned one of the male creatures in the side. It released Theo and withered away, blood splurting from under its ribs.
Help!
The others crawled towards Theo with torches and weapons raised. The creatures abandoned their victim, although one of them tore away Theo's pack.
After them!
No, no! Back to the maze's center!
The 4 men barreled back down the hallway towards the center room. Fortunately, Sophus, in spite of being left alone in the big room, hadn't been attacked. He watched and waited for them nervously. Theo stumbled and fell, clutching his sword.
What's happening? Where are they?
Sophus asked.
They're everywhere in here!
What are they?
Alexos realized where the creatures had come from with a jolt. He looked around the room at the bones and the headless skeleton of the Minotaur itself.
By the gods, the tributes, the young men and women fed to the Minotaur. They were left here after the Minotaur was killed and walled up inside.
Alexos couldn't imagine what it had been like. Once their torches went out, they would have been trapped in endless blackness. It was incredible they survived at all. They must have found those places where fresh water trickled in from the ceiling, finding enough to drink and eat the moss and fungi. They hunted for rats. Alexos remembered the tooth marks on the Minotaur's bones. The dead monster was probably one of the first meals they came across when walled inside, and it kept them alive long enough to adjust as they stripped down to the bones. They were still intelligent. They could plan, strategize, and clearly they knew the maze better than the mercenaries. But in the years in the labyrinth, starving in the dark, they'd gone insane and completely savage. They saw the intruders only as meat instead of a potential rescue. Several of them, the tributes, swarmed from the surrounding doorways, naked, pale from years of sunlessness, and all sinew and bone. There was little difference between the men and the women. Only the sunken husks of breasts or cock and balls slapping between bony thighs told them apart. They carried weapons made from bones and ropes that appeared to be wound from scraps of their own clothing knotted together.
Stay together. Protect Sophos and the map. Without them, we don't get out of here.
The 5 of them gathered near the dying fire, hands occupied with torches and weapons. Alexos counted 8 tributes, mostly men. With their primitive weapons and no armor, they shouldn't have stood a chance against Alexos' men, and yet they attacked with wild abandon. Bone spikes stabbed and slashed at Alexos and the others. They glanced off brass and leather armor or were turned aside by more sophisticated weapons. Alexos sliced one of the tributes across the shoulder, but they didn't seem to feel pain. Pyros got one of them, taking his warhammer in 2 hands. He swung it around in a wide arc. The head caught one of the tributes in the chest. Ribs cracked and popped, and the boy was picked up off his feet. Flung backwards, they landed on their spine, rolling and spitting blood. Others shrieked, and one of them stabbed Pyros in the arm. He bellowed and tried to shake them off. Another tribute crashed into Theo, opening a gash in the side of his neck, but missed the artery. Dracon speared one, a young woman, in the chest, and she went down, thrashing.
The torches! Use the light!
They swung the torches around, shoving them towards the tributes. Blinded, the tributes retreated towards the doorways while covering their faces. A couple of them grabbed the one that Pyros had dropped and dragged them away as well. Pyros and Theo covered their wounds.
Go! Let's go! Let's move! Sophos, which way?
This way. That's the doorway.
Stay together. Protect Sophos!
Bleeding and terrified, the 5 of them rushed back into the labyrinth. Alexos felt no reason to believe the tributes would simply abandon the chase. They had to get out of there as fast as possible. All of them carried torches and weapons, and they watched their backs and moved as one. Sophos pored over his map every step of the way.
This way. No, this way.
Get it right. There's no room for error.
They're watching. They're still watching.
Pyros wounded a bandage around his bleeding forearm. Theo also starched the bleeding on his neck. They hurried down passageways, breathing the stale air heavily. Sophos guided them along his map, along the thin cords of black lines.
What about the others?
They're dead. Or, if they're not already, we'd never find them. They're sellswords. We all are. They knew the way of it.
The 5 of them moved for almost an hour, although time was hard to tell in the labyrinth. Sophos seemed to gain confidence as the map conformed to his expectations. Alexos started to think the tributes only struck in one half of the maze, although technically their path did circle back and forth all over the labyrinth. In any case, their guard began to lapse. Suddenly, Theo screamed. They just passed through a round intersection where their pursuers set another trap. Theo was at the back, and the 3 tributes emerged and hooked him. One, a woman, climbed his back and slammed a sharpened arm bone into the man's throat. His cries turned wet and ragged. Blood spurted from his wound and spuming from his mouth. The women tribute dropped back, and all three dragged Theo into a tunnel, into darkness, as he dropped his torch.
Damn animals.
No! Don't follow!
Pyro ignored them and crashed after Theo and the tributes. Alexos and Dracon reluctantly followed with Sophis at their back. Inside the passage, however, the tunnel immediately divided into different directions. More doorways branched away, overwhelming their options.
Pyros!
Pyros's voice echoed down the passages. The way noises bounced off the stone, it was impossible to track. They could hear Pyros's yelling and the sound of battle. The man screamed, obviously pain in his cry. Suddenly, Sophis yelled in alarm from the passage behind them. Alexos and Dracon turned around to see another couple of tributes hauling the man backwards. One of his fists bunched tightly around the map of the labyrinth.
No! Get off him!
Alexos and Dracon followed, but another two tributes appeared from the side passage. Savage snarls bared their teeth, both presenting weapons of sharpened bone. With a roar, Alexos flung himself to meet them. He couldn't let them get away with Sophis. Their lives depended on it. Without the map, they could wander the labyrinth for days with those once human monsters on their tails and never find the way out. Fortunately, his short sword was ideal for fighting in tight confinements. He hacked and slashed, ripping into the first of the two tributes. While pain didn't seem to affect them in the same way, they still retreated under the barrage of sword blows. The second tribute lunged with its sharpened bone. The point caught Alexis in the side of the head, cutting through his scalp. Blood pouring through his hair and down his neck. Dracon trailed behind him, though, and shot forward with his spear. The spear had drilled the tribute in the throat, blood bursting from the wound. Both the paled, blood-soaked creatures fell forward.
After Sophos! After him!
Alexos and Dracon hurled over the two bodies, blocking the hallway as they died. Up ahead, they could hear Sophis yelling and struggling. Once again, echoes made him difficult to track.
How many of them do you think there are? No more than 14, right? 7 boys and 7 girls were last released into the maze when the Minotaur was killed. We've killed what? 4 of them? And surely not all of them have survived.
Unless some of them live from previous years, avoiding the Minotaur. Maybe the Minotaur was already dead, and what really got people were these things, living all this time in the dark.
Alexos kept his torch low, staying the ground. Footprints and scuff marred the dust. That and Sophis' fading voice was all they had to follow. The two men continued to veer through the passages, afraid they lost him. Their torches flickered and snapped. Moving for several minutes, they came to another blockade, but a splattering of blood led them into a side passage.
By the gods.
Alexios and his second-in-command had followed Sophis and the tributes to a charnel room, a dead end where the tributes had brought some of their victims. Blood painted the stone walls and ran across the floor. Hesiod, Typhon, and Sophis had been dragged there. Sharpened bones bristled from Sophis' chest. The stocky man already dead. Hesiod laid face down, a noose of torn cloth around his neck. Typhon had been hacked to pieces. 3 tributes, 2 women and a man, hunkered over the bodies with blood smeared over their mouths and chest. One held an arm, Typhon's arm, with ragged bites ripped out of the meat. The other had slippery red slabs of flesh as well, all of them feasting. Seeing the men and their torches, they hissed and rose to their feet.
Kill them! Kill them!
Alexis and Dracon drove in, stabbing and slashing. One of the tributes fell backwards, their face divided down the middle and caved in by Alexis's sword. The tributes had been caught unprepared and were sluggish from their large meals. Alexis and Dracon made short work of all three of them.
Damn it, all!
Alexis knelt over Sophus's body and saw the man's glazed, unseeing eyes. Alexis went to pry the map out of Sophus's hands. Something groaned and shifted to his right, however, and made him jump. Typhon was still alive, his eyes open, white against the red covering his face. His chest was a gory mess, and both his arms had been severed. The amputations, Alexis realized, had both been tied off to keep him from bleeding out. Better to keep the meat fresh. Typhon rocked forward, alive, terribly aware of what happened to him.
Help.
Typhon gasped.
Help me.
By the gods.
I'll do it. I'll help him.
Dracon stood over Typhon, spear pointed down. No way they were going to get Typhon out of there. All they could do was show him a merciful end. Typhon accepted it, closed his eyes. Dracon placed the point of his spear against Typhon's ruined chest, and carefully, mindfully, he pushed it deep into his ribs while making sure to catch his heart. Alexis peeled the map out of Sophus's hand. After making sure Typhon was dead, Dracon went to withdraw his spear. It caught, and he had to rest a foot against the body's shoulder to brace before he yanked harder. One of the tributes, however, suddenly revealed herself to not be as dead as she appeared. Snarling, she lunged forward with a length of sharpened bone.
Look out!
The tribute rammed the bone into and right through Dracon's calf muscle. The man bellowed and threw his head back. Alexis swung around with his sword and hacked through the tribute's wrist. Her hand fell away. Alexis drove his sword into the middle of the creature's face, finishing it.
Damn it!
Dracon ripped his spear free, taking hold of the sharpened bone. He pulled it free as well. Blood poured down his leg, covering his foot.
Hold it! Hold it!
Alexis and Dracon bounded the wound as best they could, blood rapidly soaking through the binding. Dracon limped, hopped really, the prospect of putting that foot down too painful. He used his spear to support himself. Alexis helped as well, but between his torch, his sword, and the map, he didn't have enough hands.
We have to keep moving.
The two of them limped back the way they came, Alexis gritting his teeth. They had the map, but Sophus had been the one who knew how to read it. It wasn't complicated, but Alexis only vaguely knew where they were even before they'd gone chasing after Sophus and the tributes. When they reached the next intersection, he would have to triangulate them if he could and rediscover the path. Half human, half animal shrieked echoed through the maze. Alexis wondered if the tributes had found their dead and come to rage. Dracon dragged himself behind Alexis, leg useless and leaving drops of blood behind them. Nothing looked familiar. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Alexis couldn't figure out where they were on the intricate map, and screams got louder and closer.
Leave me alone. I can't make it.
No, the both of us. We can make it.
No, go on.
Holding his spear, Dracon slipped slowly to the ground with his injured leg stretched out in front of him.
You can make it, but not with me.
Come on, get up.
No, go on.
Screams came closer down the passageways, echoing off the walls. Dracon refused to move, so Alexis had no choice but to keep going. He continued to the depths of the labyrinth, clutching the map in one hand and his torch in the other. Slumped against the wall of the passage, Dracon waited, his spear resting beside him. Rooting in his pass, Dracon removed one of his flasks, uncapped it, and took a long swallow. Beside him, his torch burned lower and lower. Darkness swallowed more and more of the tunnel. Ghosts moved in the shadows. Eventually, Dracon sensed movement only a few strides away. Raising the flask, he took another long swig, but didn't swallow. He picked up his dying torch. Something hissed. Dracon raised the torch to his lips and spat across the top of it, spraying the contents of his flask into the flame. A boiling fireball filled the confines of the tunnel. An illumination of the nearest tribute, open-mouthed, dark eyes of 4 more tributes lurking in the shadows. Screaming, the tribute shielded away and covered their faces. Dracon grabbed his spear and whirled around with his long, thin weapon. His spearhead pinched right through the sunken stomach of one tribute, slicing and emerging from their back. They struggled, thrashed, and the end of Draco's spear snapped off. In spite of his injury, Dracon got his one good leg under him and threw himself at the tributes. The jagged end of his broken spear flashed. He reached for the dagger on his belt as well. Recovering, the tributes shrieked and threw themselves at Dracon with their sharpened bones. Bellows and shrieks filled the tunnel as Dracon's torch was dropped, stomped on, and then guttered and went out. Far along the twists and turns of the labyrinth, Alexos kept moving. Only the crackling of his torch kept him company. He kept stopping and trying to work out where he was on the map, among the lines within the lines within the lines, but every time he thought he had it, he would soon come to another turn that proved he was wrong. The immensity of the labyrinth weighed on Alexos. With Sophis as a guide, even moving for hours, they failed to appreciate the plethora of potential choices on any given path. They had been too focused on the claustrophobic passages. All the sameness had robbed the labyrinth of context. Sophis made it seem straightforward, but navigating for himself, Alexos became overwhelmed by the turns, the doorways, and side passages, and intersections heading in all directions. Although he hadn't seen any more signs of tributes or been attacked, Alexos kept moving with increased desperation. Blood dried down the side of his head. Exhaustion burned itself deep in his bones. Alexis' torch burned low, reaching for more binding for fuel. He found his pack empty.
No.
Alexos said.
No!
Alexos looked from the torch to the map. If the torch died, he'd be left all alone in the dark, wandering the labyrinth's endless passages until he starved, was killed and eaten, or he became as insane as the tributes. The map was maybe his only key to escape, but only if he could find himself on it, and only if he had the light to read it. If it came to it, he had no choice but to burn it, for light, for just a little more light before the all-encompassing dark. Alexis' breath rasped and he prayed. The light of his torch shrank lower and lower, and the shadows closed in. This story was narrated by 242 and guest narrators. Credit mentioned by appearance. Not all narrators will appear in both parts. Alexos, played by Phoenix Fire. Dracon, played by Limited Stories. Sophis, played by Jimmy Horror. Hesiod, played by Cajun Cryptid. Pyros, played by Gamma Akatabi. Theo, played by Evil Outcast. Timotheus, played by As the Raven Dreams. Typhon, played by Beaky. And with that, my friends, our time together is coming to an end. Again, I would like to thank the author, Sean E. Britten for letting me read this story. If you are interested in reading any of his other stories or checking them out, his links are down below for easier access. Thank you again, Sean. And of course, if you'd like to check out any of those narrators who lent me their voices for these 2 parts, well, their links will be down below as well. Thank you, every single one of you, for helping me with this story. I really couldn't have done it without you guys. There would have been no hope. I picked this story because, well, I grew up reading Greek and Egyptian mythology as a child. I could still tell you everything about the Greek mythology, but the Egyptian one has kind of left my brain at this point, which is probably a good thing because Egyptian mythology is pretty messed up from what I recall. And Sean really did bring this labyrinth to life, what it might be like after the Minotaur was long dead, but yet the threat was still there and even more dangerous somehow. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. Though I do hope you started at part 1, otherwise this isn't fully going to make sense. And if you'd like to help this channel grow, please share it with anyone who might enjoy it. And if you'd like to help in other ways, I do have Patreon and YouTube memberships, where for $1 a month you get early access to the audio, and even bonus stories, where we're up to 30 of them at this point. That's 30 extra stories you get to listen to that aren't for anyone else's ears. On screen right now are all my patrons and YouTube members. These guys help me offset the little bit of payments that I have to keep all this afloat. Sadly, not everything I like to do is completely free, and these guys make it a little bit easier to keep this hobby going. Thank you guys. You guys are really awesome. If you'd like to do a one-time donation instead of memberships, I do have Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. And if you'd like to get something with my cute little avatars on it, I do have merch. All the links, including the ones to my socials, are down below. Last but never least, I would absolutely love a comment, but I gotta get you that Sunday word first. On screen right now is everyone who left me a comment last week using the word station or just left me a comment. There's no guarantee that I will keep using the ones with just comments. If you want to make sure that you are featured, please use that Sunday's word. And thank you everyone who left me a comment. I'm really happy everyone enjoyed part 1, and I'm hoping you enjoyed part 2 as well. Now, on to this Sunday's word, which is sense. I thought it would be a sensible word to use, and you guys might be able to come up with something fun to write with this. As always, write me a comment down below, and you'll be in next week's video, especially if you use this word. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It really means the world to me to know that I get these stories together and people are enjoying listening to them. It's a lot of work, and knowing people are enjoying it makes it well worth it. Sleep tight, and don't let 42 bite.